Alright, 10-minute timer starts now. Hello everyone, welcome back to the third episode of my series where I talk in front of a camera impromptu for 10 minutes in order to improve my social skills. Today I want to discuss the difference between being a loud and quiet person and being an extroverted and introverted person. Now, why exactly is this relevant in the modern world? I think it is pretty relevant because the world is designed for extroverted people to succeed. And with this idea in mind, it can create a lot of confusion in how to actually be successful in this world. Because there's this one complicated sounding term, extroversion, that could potentially be misinterpreted in many different ways, leading to disinformation being spread by people who haven't necessarily gotten their definition correct. Now, what exactly is introversion defined as? On Google, it says introversion is a fundamental personality trait characterized by a focus on internal thoughts, feelings, and moods rather than seeking external stimulation. Now, on the other hand, extroversion probably means the opposite, where it's a personality trait that is characterized through a focus on the external world, through high gratification from social interaction. Now, there's so much room for nuance with those two definitions, because there is a clear difference between obtaining gratification from social interaction compared to just being a loud person. You don't need to necessarily be a loud person to get this sort of gratification, and same goes for introversion as well. You don't necessarily need to be a quiet person to receive personal stimulation from within through your thoughts and feelings. Now, what I'm trying to say here, it's not just about shyness. Extrovertedness comes from the limit to which one can actually tolerate the amount of dopamine. Extroverts have a high tolerance for dopamine, meaning they have a more active dopamine reward system, which then leads to more benefit or stimulation from meeting new faces and more noise and greater crowds. Whereas introverts are more sensitive to this dopamine, meaning that their limit is typically smaller. Now, there is no right or wrong personality trait, and I'm not going to bore you with the details of nature versus nurture. That's a whole different video. But as someone who is an enthusiast for human design spaces and human-centered design in general, I find it pretty fascinating to think that how our definition of human-centered design is something that's accessible, that prioritizes attending to the masses of people over something that's particularly niche. And a common norm that has been adopted is to create very collaborative, open-minded spaces that puts the needs of humans first. Well, that's what it says it does, to put the needs of humans first, when in reality, it's to put the needs of extroverted humans first. Now, in the school system, or in my case, the extracurricular school system, it rewards students who are typically the loudest in terms of their ideas. Then they don't necessarily judge, or at least prioritize judging the better ideas. And this has happened to me. Last year, I was in a co-curricular program which was conducted by a surveying company. Now, I won't talk bad about them. It was a great course, and there was a little competition towards the end as to who could design the better human-centered space using a designated plot of land that's in my city. And my group and another group were going neck and neck pretty much, to say the least. But in the end, it was the team that had the better speaking skills rather than the better idea that actually won. And I'm not saying that speaking skills isn't necessarily bad, but how I actually knew that it was us two in the final was that afterwards, people came and told me, from the company that was actually hosting this event, that our idea was actually better, and they would have chosen it if they actually had the ability to vote for it. Now, I'm not going to make a decision on which is better, speaking abilities or idea generation. I think if you're going to gain the most success, you should find the best of both worlds rather than sticking to one side of it. But I just want you guys to consider, what do you think is most important and what do you think will help you succeed? Because if you try hard enough, you will get further in whatever you think. Now, this idea also relates to what it means to be human, and in this case, it means fitting in. All throughout high school, I wanted to be heard, right? Especially in my earlier days. I started off as a more introverted person, I'd definitely say. After a certain point, when I started to care more about what people thought of me, I became louder as a person. I wanted to have that presence in the school, that people could like me, that I could feel approachable, I couldn't feel scary to others. And that went to a point where I started not to think so much about what I would say and not so much about how it would impact others. Now, I genuinely hope I didn't hurt anyone during that phase, but now looking back on it, I realize that I said some weird things, not like necessarily rude things, but just very rude, and I wouldn't go back to that time because I just cringe at the thought of what I was saying during that. I want you to take away from that, it doesn't need to be forced, especially in your teenage years. Just naturally your identity will change based on your environments. You don't need to force anything, and if you do need to force something, that's a reflection on what you value and the environment that you're in. And the two also do have some overlap in that sense. It was only after I realized that I shouldn't need to force myself to be extroverted as a person that I understood the root cause of this, which was self-respect. And it was only after realizing that I needed to gain self-respect that I actually started following improvements that would change my life, such as getting into the gym, eating healthy, or considering my actions before I actually do them, and learning new information. And regardless of whether you are introverted or extroverted, I think that would definitely help you in life, because it teaches you what it means to be yourself, and it leaves you satisfied of what you are doing in life. And understanding your worth is far better than leaving an impression on mountains of people who most likely are too busy worried about their own things to even care so much. Not saying that it doesn't matter, but maybe it doesn't matter as much as you think, depending on the context. Alright, my timer is up. Thank you for watching.